First of all, I want to thank Ambassador Liu Shimin for his great speech. You said that China's dream, which you outlined extensively, could only be achieved through engagement with the rest of the world. And I would suggest that that is a reciprocal engagement, that Canada's dream of its role in the world can only be achieved through engagement with countries like your own. And we hope that the discussion today will, as David said, be one which deals with the opportunities and the challenges, because certainly there are challenges in the relations between Canada and China. Public opinion in this country isn't necessarily reflected by the composition of the people in this room, who I'm sure are convinced, most of us are convinced, that dialogue is the way to go. But that is a challenge. It's a challenge for the government. We have to recognize that. And we hope that the purpose of this conference will be that way. Before I introduce Peter Harder, I want to thank a few people, particularly our sponsors, for having made this conference possible. Without their financial support, that would not have been possible. Manulife, EDC, and Power Corporation are major supporters. The Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, another, the China Institute at the University of Alberta, and the Asia Pacific Foundation are all, have all contributed financially, as in kind has the Department of Foreign Affairs in arranging for some speakers to come. I want to thank Bill Graham for the support. Your presence here demonstrates support from the national headquarters of the CIC, which has used its website, opencanada.org, to post a large amount of publicity about this conference, and it will be there. I also want to thank particularly David Dement, who has been the driving force for this conference. Without his devotion, hard work, and persistence, the conference never would have taken place. I also want to thank the Chinese Embassy, particularly Ambassador Zhang and his team, for having worked closely with David and his team, great support. A year ago in May, Ambassador Liu and several members from his institute came to Ottawa, and they asked to see me and several of our board. And I was quite surprised that they had asked to see the CIC Ottawa, because maybe they thought the CIC National Capital Branch was perhaps a more important, prestigious organization than it really is. But anyway, the end result of that discussion was we started a dialogue which resulted in Ambassador Liu agreeing to support and be a major partner in this conference, and bringing with him a very distinguished group of representatives, including, as Bill Graham has mentioned, one of the vice presidents of CNOC, a senior officer in the Chinese military, serving officer, someone who deals with the budgets in China, 5-year plans, or Chinese action plans, I guess they're called, but, and a yearly budget call. So I think we're delighted with the number of people who have come from China on this. We're looking forward to a very fructuous discussion. Now my pleasure to introduce Peter Harder. Peter is a former colleague. I remember when he first arrived in Foreign Affairs, and I think it was 1978 or 79, 77. And then in 79, Flora MacDonald was the incoming foreign minister with Joe Clark, and her first question to the department was, "Where's Peter?" And from then on, he skyrocketed in his career. He's now a senior policy advisor to the law firm of Fraser Milne Casgrain, and he's president of the Canada-China Business Council. He has served as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Deputy Minister of Industry Canada. He's been Secretary of the Treasury Board, which is Deputy Minister rank, Deputy Minister of the Solicitor General, Citizenship and Immigration. He's the Deputy Minister of almost everything in Ottawa at one time or another. So he's had a lot of ministers to talk about Bill in terms of advising them what to say. Anyway, Peter, we're delighted you've come. We had hoped that either Minister John Baird or Minister Ed Fast would be able to come. They are not available today, so Peter is in here pitch hitting for them, and I couldn't think of any better person to do it than you. Peter, welcome.
Thanks, John. What he really has said is I wasn't their first choice or their second choice, but I was their last choice. Let me begin by thanking the CIC for its sponsorship of today's conference. The CIC is, in my view, a very important forum in linking together Canadians' participation in foreign policy debates. Bill Graham, my minister at DFAID, as has been referenced, has served the country with distinction, and it's a delight to see him continue to have an active interest in dialogue with Canadians on foreign policy through his vice presidency of the CIC. As he mentioned, the CIC and its predecessor organization, the CIIA, the Canadian Institute for International Affairs, are unique in knitting together local chapters of foreign policy thinkers and activists from coast to coast. Today's event, hosted by the National Capital Branch, is another example of the value that the CIC brings to civic engagement. Today's conference subject, Canada-China Opportunities in Transition, is timely. You have heard a most important perspective from Ambassador Liu, whose interest in Canada, I'm delighted to see, has not waned over the years of his departure since he was last ambassador here. As he pointed out, we are living through the most significant shift in global power since the beginning of the last century. This shift is animated by economic growth or lack thereof, demographic change, technological revolution, particularly in the ICTs, and the emergence of new global institutions which are being forced to reflect the reality of the shift of global power from the Atlanticist post-war consensus. The rise of Asia generally and China in particular has rightly been the focus of conferences, books, trilateral commission discussions, and the chattering class around the world. President Obama and his administration have talked about a pivot, a rebalancing. Prime Minister Harper has talked about diversification, but clearly Western leaders are rushing to focus on how they best can take advantage for their jurisdictions of this shift in economic, political, and security power. Now today I'd like to focus on a more modest yet important dimension of this transition that is shaping Canada's engagement with China. I'd like to begin by speaking to three major factors that are at play in the relationship from a Canadian perspective. First, it's not just about Ottawa. Second, it's not just about big business. And third, it's not just about money. Let's examine each of these in turn, after which I'd like to briefly raise a few issues for Ottawa's to-do list, which, if implemented, would significantly further the quality and sustainability of our engagement with China and serve our economic and security and political interests as Canadians. So it's not just about Ottawa. When you look over the span of the 40 years plus since diplomatic relations, it is obvious that national government actions, beginning with recognition itself, have been crucial in determining the state and ambitions of our relationships. And that reality continues to this day. But the federal government is no longer the exclusive definer of the relationship. Provinces and cities are new and vigorous and impressively sophisticated players in the Canada-China relationship. First, provinces. I've had the pleasure of being part of the Canada Council of the Federation, the so-called COF, the premiers' meetings together, on its two missions to China, 3 years ago and then again last September. In the last mission, we had 10 premiers and territorial leaders with appropriate delegations representing their economic, social, and cultural interests visit Beijing and other cities in China, as well as provincial office holders. A number of premiers added to their itinerary visits to their respective twinned provinces to renew and strengthen existing collaboration. Collectively, they met with senior Chinese officials, business leaders, and others to learn about and promote investment opportunities in Canada. The premiers listened, they made their pitch. Increasingly, provinces are developing more sophisticated strategies of engagement, targeting specific sectors, locations, outside of the coastal regions as well, and supportive policies that will sustain trade and investment from into their jurisdictions. Alberta, for example, has established a legislated Asia Advisory Council made up of Albertan and non-Albertan Canadians who meet about every 6 weeks to review their work plan and make recommendations to the Premier. Later this spring, Alberta will launch a citizen engagement strategy, visiting towns and cities throughout the province to outline why Asia is becoming so important to their community's future and seeking their views on how to give expression to Alberta's Pacific identity. I would encourage other provinces to adopt similar approaches appropriate to their jurisdictions. Cities. Our cities are increasingly active in both supporting exporters and attracting inbound investment. Branded as Consider Canada City Alliance, 11 of our largest municipalities are working together. Next month, they will participate in Invest in Canada seminar in Beijing, where they will bring with them over 100 specific investment projects. The mayor of Waterloo was the first Canadian mayor to use Weibo to connect with and attract Chinese students to Canada. Known now as Auntie Mayor, families contact her on Weibo about sending their children to study. The mayor of Vancouver also outsourced his Weibo account this year and wrote a message every day that was translated and made culturally appropriate for his Chinese audience. He is now one of the most popular mayors in China. I would encourage CIC chapters across Canada to engage your respective provincial and municipal leaders to develop their respective strategies of China engagement. Now, my second point is not just big business. We owe much to our business leaders who have, over the past 30 years and more, engaged in a concerted effort to build business relationships with China. Manulife, represented here, Sun Life, Power Corp, Bombardier, BMO, AECL, the list goes on. And there are new big players in the China relationship. For example, large Canadian pension funds, some of them publicly owned enterprises, I won't call them SOEs, are both investing in China and attracting Chinese investment institutions, both public and private, to invest in Canada. Our large enterprises are well seized of the opportunities in Canada-China trade and investment. But today I want to share with you two additional trends that are animating increasing Canadian economic engagement in China. First, it's all about global supply chains. Bombardier should be commended for its efforts to introduce their Canadian-based SME suppliers to the Chinese market, where they have the opportunity to participate in Bombardier's global growth. Similarly, there's a terrific Canadian story in that ultimate of globalized industries and supply chains, the automobile sector. Canada's Magna International, one of the world's largest auto suppliers to global OEMs, today employs over 8,300 workforce in China. In 15 years, Magna has grown to 25 facilities from a base of 0, 16 in 2009, and we'll have the 29 that I referenced by the year after next. All of this growth is part of the corporate strategy of harnessing global supply chains for the automobile sector of tomorrow. China is going to be the builder of global automobile exports and domestic consumption. I see the same opportunity playing out in the oil and gas sector. With CNOOC's acquisition of Nexen behind us, I would encourage the Canadian SMEs involved in oil and gas supply chains here to introduce themselves first through CNOOC and then to other major Chinese global players. Learn about the global supply chain. The second trend is a welcomed increase in SME interest in China. This has been and still is a significantly underdeveloped dimension of our economic relationship, but that's beginning to change. About 3/4 of the members of the Canada-China Business Council comes from the SME sector, and their scope of activities reflect new market opportunities in education, health, agri-food, tourism, environmental technologies, and more broadly, the service sector. Let me give you some examples. The PEI-inspired company called Anne in China recently launched a Chinese translation of Anne of Green Gables in conjunction with Tsinghua University. The book has been shortlisted for the most influential novel published in China in 2012. Who would have thought? Baby Gourmet is a small Calgary-based company started by two moms in the Calgary farmers market selling organic baby food. In their first 22 months, they acquired 12% of the market share in Canada without any advertising. They've expanded since in the United States and now are looking and beginning to play in China. Recent issues around food safety in China and the growing middle class in China give them a market opportunities which these energetic mums are sure to find. Named one of BC's top 25 exporters by the CME, Clevist has started a new mobile workforce management project for the state grid of China, Xinjiang Power Bureau. This solution is integrated with their automatic vehicle location technology for a single powerful location-based management of crews in the field as they work on the grid. This is the first of several projects Clevist will be implementing for the state grid in China. Accreditation Canada provides accreditation programs and certification for healthcare providers worldwide. Currently, AC is collaborating with the Ministry of Health in China, along with individual hospitals, clinics, and labs, to improve the standards and accessibility of healthcare throughout China. And the Canadian Standards Association is engaging in the testing and certification of Chinese products, especially consumer electronics, motors, and solar projects, for export. 80% of the products tested in China are exported to North America. The CSA labs are located in major cities across China and employ over 250 people, 90% of whom are local hires. And the CSA standard is the license to export. As welcomed as these initiatives are, we need to be more aggressive in encouraging our Canadian small and medium-sized enterprises to develop their own China strategies. For our part, the CCBC has established SME incubation facilities in both Shanghai and Beijing to offer lower-cost hoteling, as well as business entry advice and mentorship. Third, it's not just about money. I referenced earlier that I had accompanied the premiers to their last visit in Beijing. And one of the personalities that we had arranged for them to meet was MOFCOM's, the Minister of Commerce, Shen Deming. As I greeted Shen Deming at the door and ushered him to where the premiers were, he said, "Which one's Ellison Redford?" And I thought, great, he's going to talk about Nexon. And he wants to make his point. So I introduced him to Premier Redford, and he said, "I've so much wanted to meet you. You're a University of Saskatchewan grad, and so is my wife." University of Saskatchewan grads in the audience, congratulations. My point is that relationships matter. Historic relationships formed through educational exchanges are flourishing and benefiting the relationship today, and we need to continue those investments. Culture matters, bonds of shared experience and understanding matter, and culture and knowledge diplomacy ought to be an enhanced dimension of Canada's international brand in China. If you don't believe this, take a walk down a Beijing street with Dashan and see how popular you are. Or note, as the Chinese have told me, how proud they were to have Celine Dion sing on Chinese national TV on New Year's Eve. Just think about that. The number of international students in Canada has more than doubled in the past 15 years, just over 200,000 presently, with about 60,000 coming from China. This sector contributes about $6.5 billion to the Canadian economy. Now, this is all very interesting and important, and it has grown, but the fact of the matter is our market share has deteriorated as Australia and the UK are more aggressive than we are in attracting this sector and harnessing it not just for the economic benefit of today, but for the knowledge links and the cultural links and the people-to-people links for tomorrow. It's high time that we develop also greater Canadian student experiences in China. The Canada-China Scholars Exchange Program is important and has since 1973 involved more than 900 scholars. But we need to have more Canadian students learn Mandarin, appreciate Chinese culture, and develop the relationships for the 21st century. This point was made so eloquently by His Excellency, the Governor General David Johnston, at a conference last December when he referred to the receiving of an honorary degree from Nanjing University, a university that he had in his previous capacity as president of the great University of Waterloo, received as just a few months earlier. And this is what he said: "My connection to that school dates back to my tenure as president of Waterloo, when our two institutions jointly established the Sino-Canadian College on the grounds of Nanjing University. The Sino-Canadian College, I should add, was the result of more than 2 decades of joint research, particularly in environmental sciences and sustainable development, between eminent researchers from our two universities working on shared challenges as one team. The opening of the China-Canada College in Nanjing by the governor and the Premier of Ontario was especially poignant," says David Johnson, "because it was a testimonial to the twinning of Zhengzhou and Ontario begun more than a decade earlier. It was once again an example of people-to-people trust leading to concrete, innovative programs. I also remember clearly how students from Nanjing University added so much to the academic and cultural life in Waterloo, and to this day, diversity is one of the secrets of the success of that institution." David Johnston. In a small way, Alberta has just introduced an innovative program of externships. The Canada-China Business Council has agreed to host 10 Alberta graduate students to gain work experience in China. The objective is to provide first-hand job experience for young Canadians and foster a network of young China-savvy entrepreneurs. Bravo. Finally, I can't resist a few words about how the Government of Canada could enhance our interests and advance our opportunities in this period of fundamental transformation. The federal government has 3 unique roles, and I want to speak to each of them. One is in the area of trade policy. The second is collaboration to achieve infrastructure. And the third is the unique power to convene for national purpose. First, a bit on trade policy. Last year, the CCBC, together with the Canadian Council of Chief Executives, sponsored a major report by Wendy Dobson, a world-class economist and author, on exactly this subject. The themes of her report remain highly relevant. The 2 pillars of any Canadian Asia strategy should be a commitment to political security issues and engagement through state-to-state relationships. Canada should restore its regional presence through sustained high-level relationship building. Canada should develop a national brand based on trade and investment targets, which are pursued through coordinated efforts by federal and provincial governments, the private sector, and key stakeholders. In the long term, Canada should diversify its trade with China by increasing its exports of knowledge-based goods and services. A China roadmap should address mutual interests, ours in trade liberalization, investor and intellectual property protection, sector priorities, and China's in flows of people, food security, market access to energy and natural resources, and the development of services and education. Over a year later, I would suggest that the priorities basically are the same, but more specifically, we've got to ratify FIPA and get it done. Let's respond to the complementarity study concluded a year ago and publicly released last summer. This complementarity study urges Canada and China to begin to have discussions, negotiations, call them what you will, for a comprehensive economic framework agreement, a free trade agreement. This is going to be a long and difficult journey, but it begins with the first step of saying yes. The Chinese have said, Canada, let's do this. We need to respond. We all know from experience that in our relationships with countries, including China, having a shared aspirational policy framework and ambition and intent galvanizes action, without which we will simply have a long list for leaders to review of problems in the trade or bilateral relationship without any purpose. The trade policy focus in Ottawa today is understandably and appropriately on the Canada-European free trade negotiations. Both sides are crunching difficult and ambitious outcomes on traditionally sensitive areas like market access for beef, pork, dairy, and autos, but they are also seeking solutions to equally important 21st century issues like harmonizing IP standards for pharmaceutical products and improving access to subnational government procurement markets. I am confident that the political will exists in Ottawa to make the very toughest of decisions in respect of these negotiations. A CETA agreement would be a win-win and will be proof of Canada's readiness and willingness to make difficult decisions for 21st century economy. Once CETA has been achieved, the priority ought to be Asia, and this means TPP, and China, and this means bilateral negotiations. The second point I would like to speak to very briefly is infrastructure for the 21st century. You know, beginning in the late 1950s with the response to the Eisenhower Highway Program, and then the Seaway, and then we built the Auto Pact, and then we went to the FTA, and we began to increase the flows and pay attention to the infrastructure of economic commerce. And then we had 9/11, and the borders seized up, and we then, as Canadians, had to, and we must give tribute to John Manley, who's here, the efforts to deal with a comprehensive border strategy with the United States. All of that's good and necessary and needs to continue. But there is an infrastructure opportunity that we now have in ensuring Asia is equally top of mind in terms of infrastructure. The Pacific Gateway is a beginning here and is commendable, but we need to do more on air linkages, the capacity to receive the tourist traffic that Ambassador Liu Shimin referenced. We need to have the infrastructure of language facility, of culture, and of new export opportunities in the oil and gas sector. Here I'm talking pipelines and LNG terminals. We need the physical and human infrastructure that serves, just as we have served the market of our number one economic relationship, the United States, that will serve our number two economic relationship, and that is China. And the quality of that infrastructure will define the ambition of our number two relationship. The third element that the federal government has unique role in is that is the power of convening. And first, it must convene itself. Having a whole of government approach to engaging China would clearly signal a deliberate priority being given not only to the China relationship, but to getting all of the points of leverage of that relationship aligned to our interest and advantage. We still have, if I could be so bold, a number of Canadian governmental institutions developing and playing out their own China strategy without the advantage of harmonizing and collectivizing across the board. And Ottawa uniquely can deal with that. But more important, in my view, is Ottawa can help convene a whole of Canada approach. Reference has been made to military relationships. We have a booming and blossoming relationship in the security organizations amongst police and culture. But we need to develop this more robustly and more self-confidently speak to it. And this includes engaging Canadians and alerting them to why the opportunities in Asia are so significant for their children and the future of their own well-being. The Asia-Pacific Foundation ought to be commended for its dedicated focus over the last now number of months on an engagement with Canadians, a conversation with Canadians about Asia. And that's terrific. But at the end of the day, the Government of Canada needs to convene all of the stakeholders of Canada with that conversation. And that surely ought to be the aspiration coming from this, from today's conference. This conference is all about the opportunities of transition, about the growth of Asia and the place of Canada in this Pacific century. In that context, no relationship holds more opportunity for Canada than China, but we must become more strategic in our intent, more coordinated in our approach, and we must recognize and then mitigate the risks and build on the opportunities for our interest. Thank you.